The ICU at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan fell silent when a 10-year-old boy with torn clothes appeared out of nowhere and approached the bed where Grace Williams, daughter of billionaire tech mogul Robert Williams, had been lying in a coma for 3 months. The boy had wisdom in his eyes, impossible for his age, and looked straight into the soul of America's richest man, saying without hesitation, "Turn off the machines. Your daughter will only wake up when you stop holding her prisoner to your fear." Robert was about to call security when the child revealed a detail that paralyzed him. He knew about Grace's last voicemail before the accident, when the little girl complained about her throat hurting after a dental visit, a detail only Robert had heard and never shared with anyone. The boy leaned toward Grace, whispering something in her ear. The monitors began flashing wildly as the little girl moved her fingers for the first time in 3 months. Robert stared at this mysterious child and realized his life was about to change forever. Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan breathed the muffled silence of afternoon when Robert Williams, 45 years old with a fortune of $2 billion, kept vigil beside the bed where his daughter Grace lay motionless for 3 months. 8 years old, blonde hair spread across the pillow, surrounded by machines keeping her artificially alive after a terrible car accident. Robert had consulted the world's best neurologists, had a private suite built in the hospital, had sold 3 companies to finance experimental treatments. His wife, Claire, had collapsed 6 weeks earlier, admitted to a psychiatric clinic after a nervous breakdown. He remained alone with the guilt devouring him from within. What no one knew was the secret that tormented him every night. The accident hadn't been random. Robert was driving that evening, discussing a $1 million acquisition on the phone, when he lost control of the car. The last thing he heard before impact was Grace's voice warning him to watch the road. Every artificial breath from the little girl was now a silent reproach, every monitor beep an accusation echoing in his soul. Doctors had begun talking about life support withdrawal, but Robert couldn't let her go, not after what he had done. That November afternoon, while rain beat against the windows, a child appeared in the doorway, 10 years old at most, torn and dirty clothes, messy dark hair and eyes too wise for his age. The nurse hadn't seen him enter. Security didn't know how he'd gotten there. The boy approached the bed, observing Grace with an intensity that made Robert uncomfortable. He didn't seem interested in the expensive machines or luxurious private suite. His eyes were fixed on the little girl's face, as if reading something invisible to others. The child introduced himself as Michael and revealed something that froze Robert's blood. He said he spoke with Grace every night in dreams, that the little girl complained about the breathing tube and wanted to hug her daddy, but the machines wouldn't let her. An impossible detail to know, Grace had complained about her sore throat in her last voicemail before the accident, a detail only Robert had heard. Michael spoke with supernatural calm, revealing accident details no one could know. He knew about the work call that distracted Robert, about Grace's last words, about the guilt consuming him. And then he spoke the words that would change everything. "Turn off the machines. Your daughter will only wake up when you stop holding her prisoner to your fear." Robert called security, but when guards arrived, the room was empty. Michael had vanished, leaving only a note on the nightstand. "See you tonight in dreams." Hospital cameras showed the child walking corridors as if he knew every corner, but no footage showed him entering or leaving the building. Robert's investigation revealed an incredible story. Michael lived in a foster home on the outskirts of Queens, abandoned as a newborn with no known relatives. The director, Sister Catherine, told of unexplainable abilities. The child dreamed of people never met, described places he'd never been, and especially talked to coma patients. In 3 years, 12 documented cases of children in comas had awakened after dreaming of Michael. Doctors spoke of coincidences, but families were convinced this mysterious boy truly had the power to call lost souls back from the darkness of illness. That evening, Michael reappeared on time. He sat beside Grace's bed and explained to Robert the truth he didn't want to accept. The little girl was trapped not by the coma, but by her father's guilt. It was as if Robert was holding her underwater without realizing it, preventing her return for fear of the judgment he'd have to face. The boy proposed something impossible, taking Robert into dreams to meet Grace, a madness that nonetheless resonated as the only hope remaining. That night, holding his daughter's hand, Robert fell asleep and lived the most supernatural experience of his life. He found himself in the garden of their Hamptons estate, where Grace loved to play. Michael was there, smiling, and beside him was Grace, awake, healthy, beautiful, but unreachable. When he tried to hug her, his arms passed through the little girl's body like mist. Grace showed no anger or accusation, only infinite love. She told him she knew everything about the accident, wasn't angry, wanted to return but couldn't, while he hadn't forgiven himself. The dream dissolved with a promise. When I wake up, I want to see your smile, not the machines. The next day was the longest of Robert's life. He had dismissed the medical team for the evening, had written farewell letters in case everything went wrong, had even called his wife to tell her he still loved her. At 10 minutes to 8, he sat beside the bed with trembling hands, ready for the most courageous and terrifying gesture of his life. Michael arrived silent as always, took Grace's free hand and nodded to Robert. It was time. At exactly 8 o'clock, the billionaire began turning off machines one by one. First, the ventilator. Grace's chest rose on its own, weakly but regularly. Then the heart monitors. Her heart kept beating. Finally, the medication pumps. Grace lay in the most absolute silence Robert had ever heard. No beeps, no humming, no flashing lights. Only his daughter's natural breathing in the hospital room darkness. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Nothing. Robert began sweating cold, regretting perhaps making the biggest mistake of his life. 4 minutes. Grace's eyelids trembled slightly. 5 minutes. Her eyes opened. Grace looked directly at her father, smiled weakly and whispered, "Daddy, don't cry anymore." Robert exploded in liberating tears, finally hugging his daughter without the tangle of wires that had separated them for months. When they separated from the embrace, Michael had vanished again, leaving only a drawing made with colored crayons. Robert and Grace holding hands under a rainbow. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and miraculous healing. Grace recovered at a speed that amazed all doctors. No permanent brain damage, no motor consequences. It was as if the coma had been just a long, deep sleep from which she could finally awaken. Robert dismissed half his work commitments to stay with his daughter. They rediscovered together the joy of small things: ice cream in Central Park, bedtime stories, laughter that filled the house with new warmth. Claire returned from the clinic stronger than before, and the family reunited for the first time after the accident. But Robert couldn't forget Michael. The child who had saved his daughter had disappeared into nothing. The foster home reported that one night he didn't return to sleep, and since then they hadn't seen him. Police searches brought no results. It was as if he had been just a dream, if not for the drawing they jealously preserved. Grace said she still dreamed of Michael sometimes, but only happy dreams. The child told her he was well, that he continued helping other sick children, that he was happy to see her playing again. This was enough for Robert to believe that wherever he was, Michael was bringing hope to other desperate families. 1 month after the awakening, Robert made the decision that permanently changed his life. He sold most of his tech empire and founded the Michael Foundation, dedicated to children in comas and their families. Not just medical care, but psychological support for parents facing guilt, fear, and desperation as he had. Grace became the Foundation's little ambassador, visiting other children in hospitals and bringing hope with her simple presence. She had developed a special sensitivity toward sick peers, as if the coma experience had made her more empathetic toward those who suffered. 2 years after Grace's awakening, the Michael Foundation had helped over 300 families across America. Robert had discovered his wealth's true purpose, transforming it into hope for those who needed it most. Grace, now 10 years old, regularly frequented pediatric wards, not as a patient but as a bearer of joy. One November evening, exactly 2 years after Michael's last appearance, came a phone call that brought everything back to memory. An 8-year-old boy had been hit by a car in Chicago. Deep coma, little hope, but what shocked Robert was that the little boy, in fever delirium, kept repeating one name: Michael. He said he had dreamed of a boy who promised help. Robert and Grace left for Chicago immediately. When they entered the hospital room, they saw a painfully familiar scene: a desperate father sitting beside a child's bed attached to machines, a mother crying silently. The parents of Tommy, James, and Susan watched their life shatter day by day. Grace approached Tommy's bed with the same naturalness Michael had shown with her 2 years before. She took the child's hand and began telling her story, gently explaining how she too had been in that darkness, but had emerged from it. The parents listened incredulously to this little girl, who seemed to know exactly what to say. Over the week, Grace spent hours beside Tommy, while Robert worked with the parents, sharing his experience as a guilty father. James, a construction worker who blamed himself for not walking his son to school that day, found in Robert someone who understood the weight of paternal responsibility. On the 7th night, Grace dreamed of Michael. The boy appeared to her smiling, older than she remembered, and simply told her, "It's your turn now. You know what to do." The next morning, Grace asked Tommy's parents to have faith and turn off the machines for 5 minutes, exactly as Michael had done with her. At 8 in the evening, James turned off the machines with trembling hands. Tommy breathed on his own. After 4 interminable minutes, he opened his eyes and looked directly at Grace, whispering, "You're the blonde girl. Michael told me you would come." That night, while both families celebrated the miracle, Grace received her last dream from Michael. The mysterious boy appeared to her one final time, no longer a child, but a luminous teenager, to say goodbye definitively.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
He told her his task was finished, that now it was her turn to continue, that she had learned the most important lesson: true love doesn't hold captive, but liberates. When Grace woke up, she found on the nightstand one last gift: a small, polished stone engraved with "Love liberates." She held it close to her heart, understanding that her true mission was just beginning. In the following years, Grace and Robert transformed their experience into a global network of hope. The little girl, who had been saved by love, became the savior of hundreds of other children, continuing Michael's mysterious work with the concreteness of human experience. The Michael Foundation expanded rapidly beyond all expectations. From a single headquarters in New York, specialized centers were born in 20 states, California, Texas, Florida, but also reaching Canada and Mexico. Each facility followed the revolutionary protocol developed by Robert and Grace, uniting advanced medical science with deep emotional support, treating not just the patient, but the entire family. Grace had developed an extraordinary ability to recognize families losing hope. She entered hospital rooms and immediately saw in parents the same signs she had observed in her father: that devastating guilt, that paralyzing fear of letting go, that sense of helplessness that transformed love into prison. At the center in Los Angeles, she helped Maria, a 6-year-old girl in a coma after a drowning. The parents, Diego and Carmen, were consumed by guilt for not being able to save her in time. Grace spent days with them, telling how her father had also felt responsible, how he had learned that true love sometimes means doing the scariest thing: having faith. When Diego turned off the machines following the Grace Michael protocol, Maria woke up after 7 minutes of agonizing wait. The little girl whispered that she had dreamed of a boy who had taught her to swim in a lake of light, preparing her to return to her parents. On the nightstand appeared the usual stone with "Love Liberates" engraving. In Boston, the case of Kevin, 10 years old, particularly touched Grace. The boy was in a coma after a bicycle accident, and his mother Jennifer was single, completely alone, facing the tragedy. Grace moved for 2 weeks to the Boston clinic, becoming not only medical consultant but big sister to Jennifer, sharing the weight of responsibility too great for one person alone. Kevin awakened after Jennifer found courage to turn off the ventilator, but not before Grace had taught her the most precious lesson. She wasn't alone. The Michael Foundation had created a network of adoptive families, parents who had lived the same experience and offered to support those going through the coma tunnel. In Houston, the Texas Center faced the most difficult case. Marcus, 12 years old, son of a poor family from the inner city. The parents, Jerome and Keisha, couldn't afford private care, and the public system had given little hope. Grace convinced Robert to transfer Marcus to Houston's best clinic, covering all costs. What happened during Marcus's awakening shocked even Grace. When the boy opened his eyes, he spoke in perfect Spanish despite never studying the language. He said he had dreamed of Michael teaching him Spanish words, preparing him to thank the angel girl who would come to save him. Marcus became the first child to report seeing adult Michael in dreams, confirming what Grace had always suspected. The mysterious boy continued growing and evolving in the afterlife. Robert, now 50, but rejuvenated by the mission he had found, had transformed the very concept of philanthropy. The Michael Foundation didn't just donate money, but created healing ecosystems. Each center included family housing, chefs cooking familiar foods, spaces for siblings often forgotten during medical crises. The New York Center had become a place of silent pilgrimage. Families from around the world requested transfers there, hoping to meet Grace and receive the magic touch that had saved so many children. But Grace was clear. The miracle wasn't her. It was parents' love when they found courage to trust. Scientific research funded by the Foundation brought extraordinary results. Columbia University published a revolutionary study demonstrating how coma patients responded positively to what became known as the Grace Protocol, controlled periods of machine disconnection, accompanied by intense emotional support for parents. Grace studied medicine at NYU, specializing in pediatric neurology, under guidance of Professor Chen, who had witnessed her awakening years before. Her graduation thesis, "The Role of Unconditional Love in Awakening Pediatric Coma Patients," won the International Medical Innovation Award. But the most emotional moment came when Grace turned 18. Robert organized a special party. He gathered all families the Foundation had helped over the years. Over 200 children who had awakened from comas with their parents met at the Hamptons estate to celebrate not only Grace's birthday, but the birthday of hope she had given them back. During the party, something magical happened. The children spontaneously began telling their dreams with Michael. Each story was different, but contained common elements. A boy who guided them through beautiful places, who taught them not to be afraid, who spoke of a blonde girl who would help them return to their families. Maria from Los Angeles said she had swum with Michael in a lake of stars. Kevin from Boston told of running with him in an infinite meadow. Marcus from Houston described a journey on a boat made of light. All confirmed that Michael seemed to grow in dreams, becoming wiser and more luminous with each encounter. Grace listened to these testimonies with tears of gratitude. She understood that Michael had never really disappeared. He had become something greater, the spirit of hope, living in every gesture of love, in every family finding courage to let go and then embrace again. That evening, after all guests had left, Grace sat by the lake shore with the Love Liberates stone in her hands. Robert joined her, and together they watched water reflecting the stars. "Do you think Michael really existed?" Grace asked. Robert smiled, the same smile that had lit his daughter's face on Awakening Day. "I think Michael is the best part of all of us. The part that knows how to love without conditions, that believes in miracles, that isn't afraid to do the right thing even when it seems impossible. Grace nodded, finally understanding the deepest truth. Michael wasn't just the mysterious child who appeared in the hospital. He was the embodiment of pure love existing in every human heart, that same love that had pushed Robert to risk everything for his daughter, that had moved hundreds of parents to trust the impossible. The Michael Foundation continued growing, but Grace knew the real miracle wasn't the medical centers or revolutionary protocols. The miracle was that every family they helped became in turn a bearer of hope for others. It was an infinite chain of love multiplying, just as Michael had predicted in that first dream. In subsequent years, Grace became one of the world's most respected pediatric neurologists, but continued believing that the most powerful medicine was love, applied with wisdom. Every time she entered a hospital room, she carried not only scientific competence, but unshakable certainty that no child was ever truly lost. And in every Michael Foundation Center, in every room where a child opened eyes after weeks of darkness, those small stones with "Love Liberates" engraving always appeared. Doctors stopped seeking rational explanations. They knew some mysteries were too beautiful to be solved, too sacred to be analyzed. The story of Robert, Grace, and Michael became legend, not for its supernatural aspect, but for the universal truth it contained. The greatest love is one that knows when to let go. And when this love manifests, miracles stop being impossible and become simply the natural consequence of a heart that has learned to trust. 20 years after that night at Mount Sinai Hospital, the Michael Foundation had saved over 5,000 children in 50 states. But the most important number for Grace wasn't medical statistics. It was the infinite number of smiles she had seen on parents' faces when they re-embraced their children, knowing that love had truly won over fear. And somewhere, in a realm made of dreams and hope, Michael continued watching over children lost in darkness, whispering to them that they weren't alone, that someone was waiting for them in the world of light, and that love was always stronger than fear. The Michael Foundation today counts 150 centers across North America, has helped over 15,000 families, and has scientifically proven that love can truly awaken those who seemed lost forever. Grace, now 28, leads the foundation while practicing as head of pediatric neurology at Mount Sinai, the same hospital where her miracle began. Every year on November 15th, the anniversary of her awakening, Grace returns to the original ICU room. It's now called the Michael Room and has a plaque reading, "Where love learned to let go and letting go became love." She sits in the chair where her father once kept vigil and reads letters from families around the world whose children have awakened thanks to the protocol born from her experience. The most recent letter came from a family in Alaska, where 8-year-old Emma, named after Grace's middle name, awakened after her parents found courage to follow the 5-minute protocol. The child's first words were, "The boy with the light told me the angel doctor would help Daddy not be sad anymore." Grace smiled reading those words, knowing that Michael's spirit lived on in every act of faith, every moment when love conquered fear, every time a parent chose trust over control. The boy who had appeared mysteriously in a New York hospital had become something eternal, proof that miracles aren't supernatural events, but the natural result of love applied without limits. As she left the hospital that evening, Grace found a new stone on the steps, this time engraved with "The story continues." She looked up at the November sky, whispered a thank you to wherever Michael was watching from, and walked into the New York night knowing that somewhere another child was taking their first breath of freedom. Another family was learning that sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to let go. Like, if you believe love can perform impossible miracles, comment sharing if you've ever had to let go of someone you loved. Share to honor all parents fighting for their children. Subscribe for more stories of hope that change the world. Sometimes loving means having the courage to let go. Sometimes Miracles come through children who seem like angels. And sometimes salvation begins when we stop holding prisoners those we love in our fear.